I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school.
Christine Blasey Ford before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Up to now, Brett Kavanaugh seemed a shoo-in for confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now Donald Trump's pick for a lifetime appointment to the high bench is in doubt. We're going to be looking at Ford's accusations of sexual assault when in high school, her testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and later it'll be Kavanaugh's rebuttal, not since 1991 when Anita Hill testified about workplace harassment at Clarence Thomas's Supreme Court confirmation hearings. Has the U.S. Senate been the theater for such a confrontation? First appointment of the Me Too era is about more, though, than just the charges at hand. Democrats were furious that the White House waited till the 11th hour to release archive records on Kavanaugh, and that Republicans who control the Senate, watchful of the upcoming midterm election calendar, want to rush through confirmation by the end of next week. Donald Trump's second pick to the Supreme Court will be one that could shape policy for decades in the United States. Either way, what lasting impact will these proceedings have on the credibility of the Supreme Court? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the Kavanaugh hearings. Joining us from New Haven, Connecticut, and Brett Kavanaugh's alma mater, Bruce Ackerman, professor of law and political science at Yale University. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Mark Meggs teaches U.S. history at the University of Paris Diderot. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. It's before the Senate Judiciary Committee, but also the entire world that Christine Blasey Ford recounted her story earlier.
Brett groped me and tried to take off my clothes. He had a hard time because he was very inebriated and because I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit underneath my clothing. I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me.
Bruce Ackerman, your reaction to what we've been witnessing for the last 3 hours?
This is a symptom of a much larger and more fundamental problem that you already mentioned. That is to say, Brett Kavanaugh, that the administration is withholding 200,000 pages of documents involving Kavanaugh's performance, not only, or in particular, not with regard to his conduct of 35 years ago, but rather his conduct over the during the 5 years when he was a high official in the Bush White House. We already have a document that has been leaked to the press, which indicates that Kavanaugh was in direct correspondence with John Yoo, who is the author of the infamous torture memos, asking Yoo when he was going to deliver this memo. We do not have the documents from the National Archive which would put this in context. The question is, first, did Kavanaugh, was he really involved in the formulation of policy that legitimated and authorized torture throughout the world in the name of the United States against the Convention on Torture? And if so, then it was, alas, he was dishonest when he was asked these questions by Senator Leahy at his first confirmation hearing for his present position. This, to put someone who is suspected as a war criminal on the High Court of the United States without adequate consideration of the record is something that is proximate relevant and really of first importance in a constitutional arrangement which requires the Senate of the United States to advise as well as consent.
Bruce Ackerman, you were among several members, a large number of members of the Yale faculty, which have published an open letter last Friday urging that there be no rush to judgment when it comes to the nomination process, that it not be rushed through. Was it difficult to do that, since obviously Brett Kavanaugh hails from Yale University?
Absolutely not. This is I'm a very lucky person. I have devoted my life to the study of the Constitution of the United States and try to defend as best I can its integrity. This is not a question of identification with Yale University, nor is it a question of politics. We're talking about the foundations of legitimation of the Supreme Court of the United States. If this nomination is allowed to be rushed through, this precedent has been set for the super politicization of the process, the creation of partisan rubber stamping. It's really a disaster over time.
So let's talk about.
We're not only talking about this case.
Let's talk about today. Has Brett Kavanaugh met his match in Christine Blasey Ford?
Well, you know, I refuse to be a drama critic. For sure, she has put on a credible performance. The events of 35 years ago will necessarily be disputed. And if that were the only question, who wins in the drama of today, it shows how profoundly trivialized the process of Senate confirmation has become. The point of Senate confirmation is to understand the judicial philosophy of the candidate. This has already been pushed to one side in this terrible and heartbreaking drama. The idea that a justice of the Supreme Court should be not confirmed on a he says, she says, when there are other accusations of this very kind against him. Obviously, we have to have a serious investigation. If we're not going to have a serious investigation of this issue, the entire process has been really rendered into a farce.
Rendered to a farce? Mark Meggs, you agree?
I have to agree with a lot of what Professor Ackerman has said, especially the to reduce the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice to a he says, she says contest when there are such substantive issues like that may be in the thousands of documents that haven't been released. The Supreme Court will have if Brett Kavanaugh becomes a Supreme Court justice, there will be a conservative majority on the court. Two of that majority will be men who have accusations against them of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment of women, and they have been chosen, or they're among their most important tasks is overturning Roe versus Wade. That's why Kavanaugh. That's part of the vetting process of conservative justices on the court, and.
Although Brett Kavanaugh said in his earlier testimony that it's been upheld with lots of times, that he respects jurisprudence.
His position is not clear at all. It seems to me he has said that it isn't clear to him that that the jurisprudence is set. So it remains a question, and his to have the court dominated by people on these questions, especially by people with this shadow over them, is discreditable. To solve the problem, you can have, as Professor Ackerman called for, a longer investigation, and there should be an FBI investigation and so on into this particular matter of Christine Blasey Ford.
In the particular matter of Christine Blasey Ford, I heard Bruce Ackerman object to being asked to comment on the political theater that we're witnessing, because it's the U.S. Senate, and there's always political theater in the U.S. Senate. You alluded to 1991, that those hearings for Clarence Thomas, who was confirmed to the Supreme Court after he'd been accused of workplace harassment by Anita Hill. This political theater does matter, though.
The political theater is what we've got. We could have something else that would matter and would be better, and I think that's what Professor Ackerman was calling for.
Something that Professor Ackerman was calling for. Right now, public opinion in the United States more than ever polarized. We know that for a fact. It's the first Supreme Court nomination of the Me Too era, Bruce Ackerman. It's also one of the first Supreme Court nominations of a new sort of era of transparency, where despite the suppression of documents, a lot of stuff does get out. Your thoughts on all the information we're getting and not getting? Right.
Well, let's look forward for a moment. Let's imagine that the Democrats win control of the House in November. And then let's imagine some more documents are leaked from the Justice Department, just as they've been leaking already, or from some other source. And let us suppose we learn that there are documents which indicate quite unequivocally that Mr. Kavanaugh was indeed involved, let's say, in the construction of the torture memos. What's going to happen is that he will be impeached for misrepresenting his position, for being untruthful in his testimony, both this time and when he was first confirmed.
Do you feel as though he's already been disingenuous? During those initial confirmation hearings, at one point there was the high school girls basketball team that he coached that showed up. He presents himself as a family man, and now we're hearing this drip of accusations from women who say he behaved inappropriately with them.
Yes, but we don't have the kind of hard evidence that could be obtained by an FBI investigation. So if it were the case that after the November election, such hard evidence came out on these events of 35 years ago, that also would be another piece of evidence that he has obtained his position by dishonesty under oath. This is called perjury. Supreme Court justices have been the subject of impeachment from the very earliest days of the Republic. And there are precedents, which I won't bore you with, which are very relevant in the impeachment of Samuel Chase and the like. So this will do enormous damage to the Supreme Court's legitimacy. to have a justice impeached. And then, you see, impeachment is only in the United States the first stage. It then proceeds to the Senate for conviction. And then the question will be, will be extended for a long time. I myself was the lead witness for President Clinton in the effort to have him impeached. I can tell you the possibilities of an extended impeachment proceeding and also the conviction. This will drag out for a year and a half or 2 years. In the meantime, what is Justice Kavanaugh on the bench supposed to do? Is he going to actually participate in decisions of great consequence during this period, or will he recuse himself? In either event, this is only the first act of, I think, a terrible drama, which will serve to undermine confidence of the American people, who will be observing that even the Supreme Court of the United States is being, castigated and tarred by a whole endless series of accusations and charges and countercharges. I can't tell you how much this means to me, but more than that, how much it means to the historical development of the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah, and
in a polarized world, as you
a polarized world,
where everyone.
And the legitimacy of the process is something that, of course, will haunt proceedings come what may. Wednesday, on the floor of the U.S. Senate, the uncertainty over what would happen was definitely palpable.
Yes, yes. Well, anyway, it really is a tragedy. I mean, in the Oedipus Rex sense of tragedy.
Just Dr. Ford's allegation. By any normal standard of American justice, this is nowhere near enough to destroy someone's reputation or nullify their career. But for some of our colleagues are trying to move the goalposts.
While we can only vote yes or no, I hope that we in this body will acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. We are imperfect humans. We will make imperfect decisions. This monumental decision will no doubt fit that description. Up or down, yes or no, however this vote goes, I'm confident in saying that it will forever be steeped in doubt. This doubt is the only thing of which I am confident about this process.
Mark makes doubt about the process. There's doubt about government and politics on both sides of the Atlantic right now. It seems intractable. No matter what happens going forward, there's just going to be more resentment towards those in power.
Well, I'm not going to talk about everybody in power, but I can talk about the doubt caused by the current hearings on Capitol Hill for this justice. We saw Senator McConnell talking about a standard of justice, and that he felt his Democratic colleagues weren't respecting because they were presenting charges that wouldn't stand up to a proper standard of justice. At the same time, though, his Republican Party pushes through the hearings at a tremendous rate, trying to have them take place before the midterm elections, where, as Professor Ackerman pointed out, the power structure might change in Washington. So they're asking, the Republican Party is asking for two things. It's asking for a standard of justice, but it's not permitting the means for approaching that standard of justice.
And what the implications are of that, we're going to pick up on when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching a special edition of the France 2040. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're keeping one eye on Washington, where we're expecting the hearing of Brett Kavanaugh's accuser to resume shortly. Christine Blasey Ford, who's been speaking before the Senate Judiciary Committee, with us from Kavanaugh's alma mater, Yale University, Bruce Ackerman, who teaches law and political science, and here in the studio, Mark Meggs, who teaches U.S. history at the University of Paris Diderot. Welcome back to both of you. In the other news, you know, the day of this hearing beginning, as there's at the same time a fourth possible accuser who has come forth regarding Brett Kavanaugh. As Bruce Ackerman was saying in part one of our discussion, so far it's a bit of he said, she said. Nonetheless, the story now has certainly picked up speed. Allison Sargent has more.
His hearings before the U.S. Senate were supposed to be a mere formality. Brett Kavanaugh was considered a shoo-in for the Supreme Court when Donald Trump named him to replace retired Judge Anthony Kennedy in July. That all changed when lawmakers heard the story of Christine Blasey Ford. She says a drunken Kavanaugh assaulted her when they were in high school in the 1980s, pinning her to a bed and covering her mouth when she tried to scream. Then came a second accusation, this time dating to Kavanaugh's college years. His former Yale classmate, Deborah Ramirez, says Kavanaugh thrust his genitals in her face when they were both drunk at a party.
How do you feel about Max?
The latest accusation comes from a woman named Julie Swetnick, who in a statement says that in the 1980s, she witnessed Kavanaugh and his group of friends intoxicating women in order to gang rape them. An ultra-conservative Catholic, Kavanaugh has denied all of the accusations, and Republicans have largely rallied behind him, calling the allegations a last-minute smear campaign. The president has stood firmly by his candidate, but has said he will be closely watching Thursday's hearings.
It sounds like what you're saying is there is a situation, there is a scenario under which you would withdraw Brett Kavanaugh's nomination. Is that correct?
If I thought he was guilty of something like this, yeah, sure.
Democrats are calling for the confirmation process to be put on hold while the FBI investigates.
If our Republican colleagues rush to proceed without an investigation, it would be a travesty.
With the clock ticking toward November's midterm elections, the stakes are high. Democrats hope to win a majority in the Senate, making it harder to confirm not only Kavanaugh, but any other ultra-conservative judge.
Mark Meggs, you have this contrast. This is the press in France picking up on the contrast between this judge who, a conservative Catholic family man, comes up, and then this frat boy culture that's coming out with these stories. Is that discrepancy, does that matter?
I don't know that it needs to matter, but it may matter always. Is the question really when a person was 17 years old and behaved wildly? We don't know how wildly, really. That's where the he says, she says comes in.
Because this is more than just frat boy culture.
Oh yeah, but that's beyond. I would think. But it matters because he has said that he never did anything of the kind. And then we learn that he was often drunk and very, very drunk. And he talked himself in speeches about to Georgetown, I think to Georgetown, his Georgetown Prep, his high school, his private high school. He said, told a group of people, what happens at Georgetown stays at Georgetown, and that's probably been good for all of us, meaning that, we all misbehaved when we were in school. But having said first that he never did anything like what Professor Blasey Ford accuses him of, and then being discovered having made these old boy
it's the duplicity that
talks. That's the problem for him.
The alleged duplicity of it.
Yes, and he'll have to. I haven't seen him testify yet. But
he's going to be testifying later. We're going to have to cross back to Washington now. Let's listen in to that Senate Judiciary Committee.
We all know that the prosecutor, even though this clearly is not a criminal proceeding, is asking Dr. Ford all kinds of questions about what happened before and after, but basically not during the attack. The prosecutor should know that sexual assault survivors often do not remember peripheral information such as what happened before or after the traumatic event. And yet, she will persist in asking these questions, all to undermine the memory and basically the credibility of Dr. Ford. But we all know Dr. Ford's memory of the assault is very clear. Dr. Ford, the Republicans prosecutor has asked you all kinds of questions about who you called and when, asking details that would be asked in a cross-examination of a witness in a criminal trial. But this is not a criminal proceeding. This is a confirmation proceeding. I think I know what she's trying to get at. So I'll just ask you very plainly, Dr. Ford, is there a political motivation for your coming forward with your account of the assault by Brett Kavanaugh?
No, and I'd like to reiterate that, again, I was trying to get the information to you while there was still a list of other, what looked like equally qualified candidates.
And yet they're not here to testify. Dr. Ford, I'd like to join my colleagues who have thanked you for coming forward today. And we all admire you for what you're doing. And I understand why you have come forward. You wanted us and the American people to know what you knew about the character of the man we are considering for a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. I want to take a moment also to note the significant personal sacrifices you've made to come forward to share your traumatic experience with us and the American people. You've had to move, you've had death threats, all manner of basically re-victimization experiences have come your way. But by coming forward, you have inserted the question of character into this nomination and hopefully back into American life, and rightly so. We should be made to face the question of who it is we are putting in positions of power and decision-making in this country. We should look the question square in the face: does character matter? Do our values, our real values about what is right and what is wrong, and about whether we treat our fellow human beings with dignity and respect, do they matter anymore? I believe they do. And I believe the reaction we have seen to this coverage right now and your courage all over this country shows us that we're not alone. You're not alone. That women and men all across America are disgusted and sick and tired of the way basic human decency has been driven from our public life. The president admits on tape to assaulting women. He separates children from their parents. He takes basic health care protections from those who need them most. He nominates and stands behind a man who stands credibly accused of a horrible act. I again want to thank you for coming forward. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that on 6 items consisting of various statements, letters, fact sheet, posts are inserted into the record.
Is that one request, or you want me to wait for 6?
Well, I have 6 separate items.
Okay.
They consist. I can go over them for you.
Okay, no.
I would like to.
Let me not interrupt you. Okay. Your request is accepted without objection.
Thank you. And I would like to read from an item that has already been entered into the record, but this is from a letter from the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. The letter states, and I quote this letter, "This moment has become a crucible. It's a test of our progress. Do we start by believing victims of sexual assault and treating them with dignity, or don't we? So far, Senate leaders are failing that test, prejudging the outcome of the hearing, sympathizing with her perpetrator, attacking her credibility. They send a message to every victim of sexual violence that their pain doesn't matter, that they do not deserve justice, and that for them, fair treatment is out of reach. This will only serve to drive victims into the shadows and further embolden abusers. Once again, Dr. Ford, thank you very much. This is a moment for our country. Mahalo.
Senator, Ms. Mitchell for Senator Crapel.
Good afternoon. Hi. When we left off, we were still talking about the polygraph, and I believe you said it hasn't been paid for yet. Is that correct?
Let me put an end to this mystery. Her lawyers have paid for her polygraph.
As is routine.
As is routine.
Dr. Ford, do you expect the price of that polygraph to be passed on to you?
I'm not sure yet. I haven't taken a look at all of the costs involved in this. We've relocated now twice, so I haven't kept track of all of that paperwork, but I'm sure I have a lot of work to do to catch up on all of that later.
I get you have a lot going on, and you've had that for several months. But is it your understanding that someone else is going to assist you with some of these fees, including the cost for your polygraph?
I'm aware that there's been several GoFundMe sites that I haven't had a chance to figure out how to manage those because I've never had one.
And I'm sorry,
done for me.
several what?
GoFundMe sites that have raised money primarily for our security detail. So I'm not even quite sure how to collect that money and how to distribute it yet. I haven't been able to focus on that.
Okay. In your testimony this morning, you stated that Senator Feinstein sent you a letter on August 31st of this year. Is that right?
August 31st. Let me see. I sent her a letter on July 30th, and I don't have the date. I'd have to pull up my email to find out the date of her email to me saying that it was right before the hearings that she was going to maintain the confidentiality of the letter.
Say that again. It was till right before the hearings.
That's my memory, but I can look it up for you if you would like the exact date. I could pull it up on my email.
Oh, yeah. I want to make sure.
Counsel?
I want to make sure I understood what you said.
That document's been turned over to, in response to a request for documents. You have it.
Thank you, counsel. I want to make sure I understood what you said. Was it your understanding it was going to be kept confidential up until right before the hearing?
It was my understanding that it was going to be kept confidential, period.
Period? Okay. Between your polygraph on August the 7th and your receipt of the letter from Senator Feinstein, did you or anyone on your behalf speak to any member of Congress or congressional staff about these allegations?
I personally did not.
So my question was, did you or anybody on your behalf?
What do you mean? Did someone speak for me?
Somebody that is working with you or helping you, did somebody at your behest, on your behalf, speak to somebody in Congress or staff?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure how those exchanges went, but I didn't speak to anyone.
Okay. Is it possible that somebody did?
I think so. It would be possible. I'm guessing it would be possible, but I don't know.
Okay.
Excuse me, you've asked her not to guess, and now you're asking her what's possible. So I think if you want to ask her what she knows, you should ask her what she knows.
Is that an objection, counsel?
It is.
I'll have the chair rule on that.
I don't know what I don't understand.
Unless there's a legal reason for not answering it, on advice of your counsel.
So I don't totally understand the question, but I didn't speak with anyone during that time frame other than my counsel.
Okay. You've said repeatedly that you did not think that that letter that you wrote on July 30th was going to be released to the public. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And is it true that you did not authorize it to be released at any time?
Correct.
Okay. Besides your attorneys, did you provided that letter to Senator Feinstein, is that correct?
I provided her a letter on July 30th.
We're talking about the July 30th letter.
Okay.
And you provided that letter to Senator Feinstein, correct? Is that a yes?
Yes.
And you provided the letter to Representative Eshoo to deliver to Senator Feinstein?
Yes.
Besides those two individuals, Representative Eshoo and Senator Feinstein, and your attorneys, did you provide that letter to anyone else?
No.
Do you know how that letter became public?
No.
After that letter was made public or leaked, did you reach back out to the Washington Post?
I reached out to the Washington, well, they were continuously reaching out to me, and I was not responding. But the time that I did respond and agree to do the sit down was once the reporters started showing up at my home and at my workplace.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ford, thank you for being here. I just want to remind everyone that this is not a courtroom. This is not a legal proceeding. You are here under your own volition. And though that a prosecutor has been engaged here to represent my colleagues, you're here, as you said, out of a civic duty. And I want to join my colleagues that it's really more than that. You know, our founding documents talk about civic duty. Our Declaration of Independence talks about for this country pledging your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor. And anybody who's read your testimony knows what you've had to sacrifice by coming forward. Your life has been upended. You have received vicious, hateful threats, death threats. You've had to move out of your family home to some expense, I imagine, to you and your family. You've had to engage security to some expense. You've had to deal with incredible challenges. And what's amazing, and I want to join my colleagues in thanking you for your courage and bravery in coming forward, all to help us deal with one of the most important obligations a senator has, to advise and consent on one of the branches of our government, the highest courts in the land, an individual going before a lifetime appointment. And you even said that the president had a lot of folks on that list, and your fear was that this individual who assaulted you would ascend to that seat. That's correct, right?
Correct.
Yes, and it is correct that you have given a lot of resources, taken a lot of threats to come forward, correct?
Correct.
Assaults on your dignity and your humanity?
Absolutely.
How has it affected your children?
They're doing fairly well considering. Thank you for asking.
And your husband?
Doing fairly well considering. Yeah, thank you. We have a very supportive community.
That's good to hear. I want to use a different word for your courage because this is more, as much as this hearing is about a Supreme Court justice, the reality is by you coming forward, your courage, you are affecting the culture of our country. We have a wonderful nation, an incredible culture, but there are dark elements that allow unacceptable levels of sexual assault and harassment that are affecting girls and boys and affecting men and women, from big media outlets to corporations to factory floors to servers in restaurants to our intimate spaces and homes and apartments all around this country. I stepped out during the break and was deluged with notes from friends all around the country, social media posts, that there are literally hundreds of thousands of people watching your testimony right now. And note after note that I got, people in tears, feeling pain and anguish, not just feeling your pain, but feeling their own, who have not come forward. You are opening up to open air hurt and pain that goes on across this country. And for that, the word I would use, it's nothing short of heroic. Because what you're doing for our nation right now, besides giving testimony germane to one of the most sacred obligations of our offices, is you are speaking truth that this country needs to understand. And how we deal with survivors who come forward right now is unacceptable. And the way we deal with this, unfortunately, allows for the continued darkness of this culture to exist. And your brilliance, shining light onto this, speaking your truth, is nothing short of heroic. But to the matter at hand, one of my colleagues who I have a lot of respect for, and I do consider him a friend, went to the Senate floor and spoke truth to both sides of the political aisle. Senator Flake said yesterday, this is a lifetime appointment, and this is said to be a deliberative body. In the interest of due diligence and fairness, her claims must be fully aired and considered. I agree with him. But you've asked for things that would give a full airing, from corroborating witnesses to be called. You've submitted to an intrusive polygraph test. Can you answer for me, how do you feel that all the things that could have been done thoroughly to help this deliberative body have not been honored in this so-called investigation?
I wish that I could be more helpful and that others could be more helpful and that we could collaborate in a way that would get at more information.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to introduce for the record 7 letters from Lambda Legal, from Mormon Women for Ethical Government, youth-led organizations around this country, the international unions, bricklayers, allied craft workers, a letter from 295 survivors of sexual violence in support of Dr. Ford, and a letter from 1,600 men. It's a campaign in support of Dr. Ford, and those who want to assert, men and women, that survivors of sexual violence are not opportunists, do not have political axes to grind, but are coming forward with courage and with heart to speak their truth and try to end the scourge of sexual assault and violence in our country.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator Tillis, Ms. Mitchell for Senator Tillis.
Dr. Ford, in choosing attorneys, did anyone help you with the choice on who to choose?
Various people referred me to lawyers that they knew in the Washington, D.C. area. So as you know, I grew up in this area, so I asked some family members and friends, and they referred me to like divorce attorneys that might know somebody that might know somebody, and I ended up interviewing several law firms from the D.C. area.
And did anybody besides friends and family refer you to any attorneys?
I think that the staff of Dianne Feinstein's office suggested the possibility of some attorneys.
Okay. Including the 2 that are sitting on either side of you?
Not both of them, no.
Okay. We've heard a lot about FBI investigations. Mm-hmm. When did you personally first request an FBI investigation?
How many weeks ago? I don't know. I guess when we first started talking about the possibility of a hearing, I was hoping that there would be a more thorough investigation.
Would that investigation have been something that you would have submitted to an interview?
I would be happy to cooperate with the FBI, yes.
Would you have been happy to submit to an interview by staff members from this committee?
Absolutely.
Okay. Besides, you mentioned some GoFundMe accounts. Besides those, are there any other efforts outside of your own personal finances to pay for your legal fees or any of the costs incurred?
It's my understanding that some of my team is working on a pro bono basis, but I don't know the exact details, and there are members of the community in Palo Alto that have the means to contribute to help me with the security detail, et cetera.
Have you been provided?
I think I can help you with that. Both co-counsel are doing this pro bono. We are not being paid, and we have no expectation of being paid.
Thank you, counsel. Have you seen any of the questions that I was going to ask you today?
No.
Have you've been asked a few questions by other people as well. Have you seen any of those questions in advance?
No.
Have you been told them in advance?
No.
And likewise with my questions, have you been told my questions in advance?
Definitely not.
Okay. You mentioned about some possible information, such as when Mark Judge worked at the supermarket. I want to ask you about someone else. You mentioned that there was a classmate who was really sort of the connection between you and Brett Kavanaugh. Who was this person?
I think that case with Mr. Whalen, who was looking at my LinkedIn page and then trying to blame the person, I just don't feel like it's right for us to be talking about that.
I'm not trying to blame anybody. I just want to know who the common friend that you and...
The person that Mr. Whalen was trying to say looked like Mr. Kavanaugh.
Okay. How long did you know this person?
Maybe for a couple of months we socialized, but he also was a member of the same country club, and I knew his younger brother as well.
Okay. So a couple months before this took place?
Yes.
Okay. How would you characterize your relationship with him both before and after this took place, this person?
He was somebody that we used the phrase I went out with. I wouldn't say date. I went out with for a few months. That was how we termed it at the time. And after that, we were distant friends and ran into each other periodically at Columbia Country Club, but I didn't see him often. Okay. But I saw his brother and him several times.